of the day is good. And that's because we have heat in this room. Only kidding. Any rate, before I introduce Paul Imaris, who will introduce Hans tonight, let me tell you about next week. So please, everyone outside of my class as well, please consider attending next week's Artist Now lecture. The guest is Emmanuel Pratt from Chicago, from Chicago State University. Emmanuel Pratt has definitely an atypical art practice. He works cross disciplines. He works in photography. He works in community building. He works in urban farming and aquaponics. Simply put, Emmanuel Pratt helps transform neighborhoods. Very, very inspiring artist. I've heard him speak a number of times, and I selected him as my guest next week. So I think Emmanuel Pratt should inspire, but every week our visiting artists inspire. And tonight we have a member of the UWM Peck School of the Arts extended family, Hans Gindlesberger, is presenting, which we've been looking forward to this date for a long, long time. And he is a Nohl recipient, so that makes perfect sense for Paul Imaris to be introducing Hans tonight.
Okay, can you hear me? Good. Happy to be back again to introduce the second of two Nohl Fellows who are presenting on the Artist Now series. Nicholas himself presented a few weeks ago, and Nicholas won in the established category, Hans won in the emerging category. The exhibition that features his work and the work of other current Nohl Fellows, some of whom I see in the audience, is at Inova. I suggest if you haven't seen it, that you go down and take a look. It's a really interesting show. There's a great catalog. There is an essay by Carl Bogner, a personage many of you know, I think, about Hans's work in here. And there's still a few more activities left by Nohl Fellows. One tomorrow night when American Fantasy Classics activates their space, the streets of New Milwaukee. And they will be doing that again at the end of the month. There'll be another screening of As Goes Janesville here at the Union Theater. And I believe the Urban Studies area is organizing a reception in the Union Gallery beforehand and a panel discussion after. And then Sarah Luther will return in early December to give an artist talk about her field guides. So, and as some of you know, we've chosen the next round of Nohl Fellows for 2012, and there's information about them on the Linden Sculpture Garden website and in the press. So you can acquaint yourself with the next round of people who will be doing involved in this program next year. Hans Gindelsberger earned his MFA in photography from the State University of New York at Buffalo in 2006. And his work examines how contemporary society constructs and represents concepts of place. His projects span photography, video, and installation and have been shown widely in exhibitions, festivals, and screenings, including Gallery Image, Aarhus, Denmark, Gallery 44 in Toronto, Yet Beckman Projects in New York, Was Off Photography Festival in Arles, France, and the International Symposium on Electronic Art in Albuquerque, among others. Gindlesberger, who taught here at UWM for several years, is now an assistant professor of digital imaging in the School of Visual Arts at Virginia Tech, so we welcome him back to Milwaukee.
How's that? Can you hear me? Good? Yeah? All right. Hi, friends. It's nice to be back in town. Thank you, Polly, for the introduction, and Nicholas, too. Let's see. I titled the presentation Dead Reckoning. Not familiar. Dead Reckoning is an outmoded process for calculating geographical location, using your previous location as a reference point. And it's kind of interesting because it's a process that's subject to cumulative error. So the further you go, the more you advance, the more likely it is that you get lost Dead Reckoning could be kind of a concept that could bring together what I think is a constellation of very different projects, but ones that revolve around place and travel, ideas of futility and failure, and how personal geographies intersect with larger cultural narratives. So, it's a logical place to start is with the work that's in the Nohl exhibition at Inova right now. So this is just a shot of the installation of this project. This is a project that in some ways began a long time ago in 1945 with my grandfather. He was an American serviceman in the Army stationed in Germany during World War II around 1945. And the project kind of began with this roll of film that's on the top left of the slide. It was a roll of film that he shot when he was stationed there and then returned home with, but never had it developed. So it sat in his closet for close to 70 years until just a couple of years ago. He felt ill and had to leave his home, and so I came into possession of this roll of film and was interested, of course, in what might be on it. And kind of had this idea that I was interested in making a project on it, using it as kind of a seed for that, because I was planning on traveling to Germany at around the same time I found this film. But first I had to find out what was on it, and he, had no idea. So I was too nervous to do this myself, so I sent it out to a lab in Chicago to have it developed. I don't know if this is actually true or if the guy at the lab was kind of pulling my leg, but he said that they had their night vision goggles on and were very carefully examining this roll of film, making sure that nothing was left to chance. But when I got it back, it was completely black. Of course, it just had too much exposure to light and time. And so I had this roll of empty film with kind of nothing on it. And I had this travel plan to Germany, and I took the film with me, kind of not knowing what I would do, at the time. And what I arrived at ultimately was this project that kind of cross-pollinates concepts and processes between architecture and photography. I guess the first step of this was this simple line drawing in the top right. My grandfather had taken a fair number of photographs when he was stationed there, and some of them ended up surviving, and I had prints of those. And they were all architectural photographs. They were all photographs of buildings that had been leveled by bombings. And so the drawings that I started to make corresponded to those existing images in his archival photographs. And what the drawings do is imagine the portions of those buildings that no longer exist, that were disappeared by the bombing. And so when I was in Germany, I made these simple drawings kind of corresponding to those photographs. And then after coming back, kind of the next step in this process was to render these as cyanotypes. And so how I ended up doing that was I took his original roll of film, that blank strip of film, and laser engraved the drawing into that, kind of re-imprinted this information, that correlated with other photographs that we made back into the emptiness of that film. And then contact printed them as the cyanotypes that you see on the bottom. Cyanotype was sort of a logical kind of step. It was a process that overlapped art and science and architecture in kind of interesting ways. Invented by an astronomer who was looking for a quick and easy way to make copies of his notes. But maybe the most prolonged use of the cyanotype was in architecture and engineering, where, because the chemistry is very simple and very cost effective, it became a popular way for architects to reproduce their work. And so, get the blueprint from that. And so these kind of architectural fragments, were starting to be made real, maybe made more kind of tangible, physical, through the reinscription into the film and then the printing as photographs. So this project kind of all came together when I was in Berlin and visited the Kaiser Wilhelm Church in the center of the city. The church was thoroughly ruined by bombings in 1943, but kind of interestingly, it was spared from being demolished. There was kind of a collective decision to let it stand as a symbol for the horror of war and a kind of memorial to that. And I'd been in Germany maybe 2 years before and visited the church and kind of saw it as a tourist. This last time that I was there with my family. We'd taken our daughter to the Berlin Zoo, and this happened to be kind of right next door, so we decided that we would go and visit with her again. And we were trying to find it, and we're in the location that we thought that it was, and kept walking round and round and round, and couldn't seem to find where it was. And come to find out, it had been covered in this kind of false facade. You see on the right, it kind of looks like an anonymous, apartment complex or something like that. The building itself is starting to deteriorate really rapidly, and so the city kind of surprisingly was having difficulty raising the funds to preserve it. Berlin's a city that's really gone on its way to kind of acknowledge that history and to let it stand. And so this was kind of an anomaly in some ways, and it's in the middle of a shopping district, and so this building is sort of in this state of flux in some ways. And that's where this sort of came together. These photographs from my grandfather's archive and this experience in the church, and how thinking about its physical presence, how it's absent and present in the at the same time. And I was looking for something that was there that couldn't be seen. It seemed like that kind of obstruction was very similar to the moment when I unspooled that roll of film that my grandfather shot, where I knew something had been recorded, but couldn't quite access it, and didn't know what it was. It was buried and lost. And so in that moment, there's this connection to my grandfather's history reemerge in my experience in Berlin at the church. And the project really became, for me, about reconjuring and reclaiming that act of witnessing that my grandfather took part in and that was lost to time. So this project kind of maybe thinks about photography and the photographic act in a kind of peculiar way. One of the things I was influenced by were the various movements of amateur photographic surveys that took place all throughout Europe in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. This photography became cheaper and more democratized. And these surveys kind of came out of a relationship between photographic reliability and public utility. This idea emerged in communities all over Europe that the photograph could be used as a tool to preserve historical buildings, customs, and create kind of a collective memory bank of national narrative and identity. So Elizabeth Edwards wrote this really kind of wonderful study on all these photographic surveys in Britain. You can see in the bottom part of that text, she references this passage from Roland Barthes' Camera Lucida. And on a personal level, for me, the project was really about elaborating the mechanics of photography and the sense of consciousness that Barthes is describing there. Hard to imagine a sense of history without the photograph. And so this project was trying to relocate the photographic act in the way that it collapses and brings together past and present and future across various mediums, trying to make other mediums kind of perform and think like photography. And so the project has this kind of re-performance of my grandfather's witnessing across time, different mediums. And I think for me it's kind of a very strained attempt to understand that history. Carl kind of, I thought, had a beautiful quote in the essay that he wrote about the work. He talked about daring one process and then another to restore and to reclaim an act of witnessing lost to time. So where the project went from here, I had those simple line drawings reinscribed back into the film. From there, I made three-dimensional renderings of the same drawings, kind of starting to give actual kind of physical form to those images. So these are, this is a screenshot of Rhino, where these things are 3D modeled. I found throughout this project really kind of interesting points of synchronization between architecture and photography, and the language of photography. You know, I was always kind of finding it again in these other mediums. Just in terms of light, you know, light being the thing that makes the photograph happen, and light being the thing that inscribes those drawings into the film. This 3D modeling, although when these were actually printed and rapid prototyped, it didn't use this process. But in researching these various 3D printing processes, I found one that used light as the agent to kind of bind that material together, which I thought was, again, kind of really beautiful and unexpected correlation. So from those 3D models, they were rapid prototyped into these little scale models of those architectural references. And then, obviously, later composited into these images. And like I said, just before my grandfather passed away in summer of 2011, I was on this trip in Germany, and I used it to retrace his movements through the country and made images of the landscapes and cityscapes that he might have witnessed. And so, you know, these scale models, these drawings that kind of extrapolated from his photographs were then recomposited back into my own images, and that record of my own travel and experience in the country. And kind of interestingly, implicit in the work is a level of misunderstanding, because although I had this archive of his material, the exact locations where he visited, you know, were never listed. I knew kind of the general areas, the cities that he was in, but never could actually tie the photographs that I was, you know, building these images up from to an actual place. And so my role in the work, I felt, really embraced kind of inevitable generational loss of memory, maybe kind of a willing amnesia in response to you know, tragedy, and contrast that with an obligation or a desire to remember that same history. And the landscapes too, you know, kind of overlay family history, you know, my grandfather's movements and the country, my own movements, with you know, the broader cultural experience. So this is a kind of an interesting one, the Birkenkopf in Stuttgart, which is the highest point of elevation in the city. But it's an artificial hill that's been built from the ruins and the rubble from World War II. So, you know, this mound has been artificially constructed, and at the top of it, there are a lot of the facades from buildings. You can see these little architectural fragments that are, you know, littering the top of this hill. Again, kind of left as a memorial, you know, to that place and that history. One of the things I thought a lot about was how these forms would function, how they could be read. And I wanted them to kind of be open to a lot of different interpretations. You know, they could be read as architectures, maybe as memorials, maybe even kind of an apparition, maybe even going further into the abstract, just a pure thought, memory, an idea itself is placed into the landscape. And kind of, you know, obviously I had some kind of source material to go off of from those photographs, but there are other things I was looking at too, to kind of inform how these kind of take form. These are an interesting set of monuments called spomenik that the Yugoslavian government erected in kind of the celebration of nationalism and the accomplishments of the people. And they're these very futuristic forms that imagine, you know, the future of this country. And you know, after the country collapsed and disintegrated, these things have sort of fallen into disrepair, which you can see, you know, in the one on the right. Other things, I was looking at German expressionist cinema and you know, these sort of severely distorted graphic stage sets that were very angular. You know, that in breaking any sense of realism, you know, are meant to mimic the psychology and interiority of the characters. Also kind of interested in brutalist architecture, which is this post-World War II construction method. It's often been criticized for disregarding the social and historic environment that surrounds it and producing a kind of discontinuity with the rest of that landscape. Also, a lot of these structures too are kind of falling into disrepair, and there are often debates about whether they're worth preserving, largely for their aesthetic sort of qualities. And this is an artist that did these interesting kind of sculptures that were related to architecture, where she would cast the interiors of different spaces. So this is a kind of a modest row house in a rundown neighborhood in London, where the interior of that building is cast and then put out into public space. I was interested in this, again, as a process of working that manifests, the negative space, kind of similar to the way that I imagine, the lost fragments of those buildings and manifesting those in physical form. This is a library that she did. This project's also really interested in surface texture, which is kind of a shared sort of thing, and another kind of interesting point of relation between photography and architecture that I found. The image on the right is kind of a detail of one of these small printed models. The image on the bottom left, again, is one of those renderings in Rhino, and the image on the top left is a part of one of the archival photographs that I worked from. And one kind of interesting thing that I found in researching this was after the American Civil War, the photographer Matthew Brady sold off, repurposed a lot of his glass plate negatives to be used in greenhouses. And so there's this kind of interesting history there of war and architecture and photographic image and architectures of images. And so what I ended up doing with this was going back to archival photographs and kind of I found in the modeling program you could graph images onto surfaces, and so those photographs are kind of re-imprinted back onto the surfaces of these little models, just as kind of another gesture to reincorporate that material and that history. So if you go see the Nohl show, there's 12 of the images to correspond to the 12 photographs that were lost, and then a light box which houses the laser etched negatives and also the roll of film. It's just kind of an artifact of the whole process. And that's kind of where the project is at right now. Although I had these ideas of where it might go, one thing that I'm interested in doing is creating augmented reality versions of these forms that you can view on a smartphone. So like something where you could actually be in the landscape and hold your phone up to that, and the phone would kind of decipher that space and project these forms, in the screen onto that landscape. I'm interested in that as kind of an experience that in some ways maybe makes them more real and more authentic, but maybe less real and kind of more ghostly at the same time. So that's a project that I've been working on since leaving Milwaukee. I'll jump back a little bit. This is one I made before getting to Milwaukee. Before I came here, I spent 1 year in West Virginia at a one-year teaching appointment there. And West Virginia and I are on fine terms. I cover no ill will to the States. But while I was there, my family stayed behind in Buffalo, New York. And so I had this interesting experience of making the commute every single week, about 500 miles, 490 exactly, between Huntington, West Virginia, and Buffalo, New York each week that I would drive 2 times. So I did this for about 9 months, and at the end of that year, I felt some level of guilt or regret for a missed opportunity. This is the only way that I really experienced that state and that place was in the most homogeneous way possible through the highway system. And so I was kind of interested in doing this simple work that would engage that space and maybe help me understand it better. And so one of the interesting things I found when I was living there is West Virginia has this vernacular gesture, that kind of creates an impromptu map of the state. When you hold your hand in this configuration, it corresponds directly to it. So, like when I first got there, and I would, be talking with students, they would use this as a quick reference, and they'd hold up their hand and be like, Huntington, we're here, and like my hometown's from here, and this kind of thing. And this would happen, quite frequently. It's like, Wisconsin's the mitten, right? Or it wants to be the mitten. Michigan also wants to be the mitten, and so, this is maybe the most curious thing, and I like this bit of kind of local language that I found. And I ended up making this project that utilized it. I created a series of photographs, that overlaid the map and the gesture. And you can see in this one, I traced a line, which is the route that I would take between Huntington and eventually where it terminated when I crossed over into Pennsylvania. And then I went to a palm reader to have my fortune read and to have that line interpreted within the context of my own natural handprint. The palm reader I went to, her name was Anne Reynolds. I don't know if any of you are old enough, but she used to be on the Psychic Friends Network, like back in the 80s or 90s, so she's semi-famous, quite good at what she does. So I had my hand read, but I didn't tell her what the line was, what it corresponded to, just that I was interested in it and wanted to kind of read it based around that. So this is like a real experience with her. I'd never been to a palm reader before. It was kind of a trip. I brought along a tape recorder to record our conversation in this transcript. But she warned me that every time somebody tries to bring in a recording device to her space, things go haywire and it all breaks down, which actually turned out to be true because I took a student with me, and we left and pulled over at a gas station, and I got out the recorder to listen to it, and it was like crackly and fuzzy and everything. So I think she like planted something in the kitchen to kind of interfere with all this. I don't put much stock in palm reading, but I got this this transcript. It's really pretty interesting. Because she was really good at her job, and she, had no idea sort of what my agenda was. But she was very good at maybe intuiting what people want to hear. So in a funny way, a lot of this kind of corresponds to the actual experience that I was going through, and the kind of questions and concerns that I had. All of this. This is just a small excerpt of one of the things that she told me. So, I mean, there was a lot about travel, a lot about the new opportunity. She was a little bit off, like the ocean and the lake. Like, no, that's pretty close. Like, that's good enough for me. So, this is a project that came after that, and this is maybe 2009, right after I got to Milwaukee. So I spent this year traveling back and forth, a ton of time on the road, and somehow it was kind of hard to leave that behind. And so I was, more kind of in place here, but still, I had this sort of need for wanderlust, and found it in Google Street View. And I embarked on this cross-country trip, a kind of virtual journey, from East Coast to West Coast, using Street View as my surrogate. And it's a trip that kind of intertwines again. My family history, my own family's migration from the Port of Philadelphia to the Midwest, and then kind of picks up on American mythology and quintessential westward journey, and follows kind of historical routes, the Old Lincoln Highway, which is the first transcontinental highway, the Oregon Trail, and then arrives on the West Coast, some other kind of significant routes along there. And so I did this whole thing, which took a couple months to make it from one end to the other. I was just doing a screen capture of the entire thing, and it was this really laborious process of sitting down at the computer and just constantly clicking a point on the horizon. If you're familiar at all with Street View, it's basically how you navigate. You click somewhere on the horizon, and you sort of get this interpolated image in between where it speeds you forward to that new location, and then the image resolves and becomes photographic again. And so with all that screen captured footage, what I ended up doing was a very simple thing of removing all the photographic imagery, and all you're left with is that interpolated image between the 2 points that Google kind of just invents. And like I said, I made this around 2009, so it was the height of the financial crisis, and I was interested in this image that in some ways could be kind of a very literal visualization of this doctrine of American progress, but then at the same time maybe question the efficacy of that mythology, because it presents this completely hollow journey. There's sort of, it looks like a landscape and it looks like a place, but there's really nothing there. It's just emptiness. It's the kind of abstract data. It's a complete invention, and it's a movement through kind of a no place. And so this goes on and on for a long time. It's like an hour long of this. In some ways, I was also thinking about the way that it projected back to early cinema and the kind of travel film and the travel log, and the way that those films always kind of presented this really affirming simulation of geographic context. And again, the way that this might, in the time that it's made, kind of signify something else. I was also just interested in what I thought was a new sort of image that Google was making. Sort of this completely continuous photograph that in some ways never ended. The whole world kind of image. This was something that was kind of interesting to me. And again, the way that it's in some ways a very futuristic image, but one that kind of harking back to those more antiquated technologies. Let's see. So this is just a map that kind of shows the route that I took. Again, just a couple artists. Again, take these new spaces that are created by technology and find ways that photography can assert itself inside them. Michael Wolff and his projects, where he's actually photographing the screen, or Doug Ricard, which is sort of embarking on traditional photojournalism, but using Street View as the surrogate and going into kind of troubled neighborhoods, and so there's interesting ethical implications maybe with that. So sort of forward-looking projects. But then also, one could maybe look back and evoke these other sorts of projects. This is from Timothy O'Sullivan. He was participating in one of the U.S. geological surveys, which was a government program that was formed out of the need to inventory all of these vast amounts of land that were added to the United States by the Louisiana Purchase and the Mexican-American War. And it just sort of served to index and archive all of these geological features and the landscape. And sort of thinking, everything has been photographed, and after all that territory has been visited and mapped and photographed, where else can you go? And it seems like these sort of new virtual spaces in Street View or Second Life are in some ways maybe the most logical openings and new frontiers. And so, this Western image that I made, also was sort of concerned with indexing, surveying, the landscape, and exploring its topography, maybe not the topography of the actual landscape, but the topography of the image. This is project called Third View, where they went back and rephotographed those landscapes that the U.S. Geological Surveys did. So I don't know if you can read that, but the one on the top left is from the 1800s, the original image. Then they went back in the 70s and very precisely set their cameras up to overlay pretty exactly the original image. And then the photo on the bottom, they went back again in around the millennium, around 2000, to photograph it and to sort of mark that change in the landscape. And I have this kind of idea or inclination to go back to Westering and kind of create a rephotographic survey out of it, because I realized a little while ago that Google has completely kind of changed the way that image is rendered. Obviously, they've rephotographed it. These are both South Alden Street in Philadelphia. So it's been rephotographed, but the way that the image is actually formed, I don't know, like the algorithm that they use to create it, it's been changed too. So the kind of topography of the image, changes as well. And so I have this kind of desire to go back and see how some of these places can correlate with this change in software, code, or whatever Google's doing to make this happen. This is one from April 1st, where as an April Fool's joke, they did an 8-bit version of Street View for a day. So again, like these really rapid and radical changes can happen just through a simple kind of shift in the code. It's sort of interesting. And maybe speaks back to that rephotographic act in the actual landscapes. Westering was the last in the sequence of projects that kind of took an interest in the panoramic image. This is the first one where I became interested in the panorama. It's called Gone to Seed. Gone to Seed is an agricultural idiom. It usually carries a negative connotation, which it describes the stage in plant development, so the crop has become weak and devitalized, and it's no longer economically viable. But Gone to Seed also has this really beautiful double meaning, where it also carries a bit of hope with it, because as the plant reaches that stage, it's able to bear seeds and kind of give way to the subsequent generation and rebirth itself. So I wanted to use that as the basis for work that would take place in an exhausted landscape, but where there's a desire to revitalize it. So this piece presents a continuous view of a small town Main Street scene, and the installation runs 40 feet long by about 16 inches high, and you can see it's a little bit tough to see, but the print is positioned away out from the wall, and housed behind that are two video projections that interact with the still photographic surface. And so like I said, I was interested in the panorama, the panoramic image, whether it was in the form of the wide-angle photograph or the panoramic theaters, that were popular in the 19th century, and the way that those images, relate to a kind of romanticized idea of the landscape. I'm particularly interested in research a lot the theaters, which were an urban phenomenon and coincided with the expansion of the city. And we're very much interested in how the individual exists in the landscape and an individual's role in the city. And they had this really interesting, very practical purpose to kind of assuage fears about the rapid growth of the city. When the urban environment was being built up at such a rapid pace, people maybe had some level of anxiety about losing their place or losing sight of the world. And these panoramas kind of offered a way to fix that. There's a couple illustrations of the buildings. So these are actual constructions, like the image on the left, where you would enter into the building, one of these rotundas, and then you maybe see this in the image on the right. Way up here, there's some people, spectators, positioned in here, and then it presents this kind of bird's eye view of the cityscape. So the panorama really became the medium of instruction, where the viewer was always situated in the center, this privileged position in the image, would present a coherent scene that was ordered around them. So it was a really empowering experience for the viewer. In a very bourgeois way of looking at the world that allowed the viewer to possess the landscape and take hold of it, and gave the spectator a sense of agency within that space. It was also kind of interesting to me because the panorama was the first sort of mass spectacle and a forerunner of the cinema, which eventually, ended up killing it. So this is sort of a short-lived phenomenon. This was the second time I'd worked with moving image. What you see is a photograph that shows the moving image projected from the rear of the print onto its surface. And I was interested in the space of the cinema and the moving image and how the actor on the screen could act as a surrogate for the spectator. And the viewer kind of identifies with that actor, that character. So in the center of the piece is where this projection is located, kind of in reference to that privileged position of the spectator. And there's this looping video that goes on and on. It's a stop motion film. It was composed of about 12,000 frames, shot in front of a green screen. And so when it's animated, it kind of has this halting and hesitating movement that I wanted that kind of materiality of the image to reinforce the futility of this gesture, where he's planted, in this kind of empty field, and he has a watering can, and he's just watering again and again throughout this piece. There's a little bit of video that will kind of show you how that looks in the center. So there's 12,000 frames animated into a short clip that, again, just loops and loops. And that gesture of watering, never accomplishes anything. It was really interesting to be in the space while this was playing and watching people interact with it. People would spend a really long time with the piece, kind of hoping that something would happen, and something would come from that action. 10 minutes just kind of looking at this thing, that never really goes anywhere. So I'll come to this in just a second. This other projection is just this sign that kind of mimics the performance of the character spinning round and round. One thing, again, about the kind of construction of this piece that was interesting, I found that when the panorama theaters were first made, these were massive buildings, and so they hired any number of people to paint and to work on these spaces. And there are all these irregularities that came from that, where two people would work side by side, and one person is painting a scene, and then the other person comes and their work butts up against one another, and it doesn't quite match up, and the styles are kind of incongruous with one another. And that's kind of at play throughout this entire image. Where it was this gigantic photograph, 40 feet long, and I was putting this together as kind of a composite image on a small little 15-inch monitor, and you couldn't kind of see the whole thing, and I thought that was just sort of an interesting connection back to that. This was a piece that came after Gone to Seed, and in doing the research into the panorama, I found one really interesting example, which was Cineorama, and it was unique among all the panorama theaters because it attempted to produce a moving image panorama, a 360-degree hot air balloon flight above Paris that they filmed by rigging up an actual hot air balloon with 10 film cameras and filming the ascent above the city. And then you can see in this next slide, this image on the right is an illustration of it they created this panorama, that had a simulated, hot air balloon basket that the audience is in, and then underneath that, a bank of 10 film projectors that would project a sequence of images around the space. This is really kind of interesting because it was shown at the 1900 Paris Exposition. In documentation, it was kind of hard to find because it never quite got off the ground. I found two sort of different variations on this. One said that there were fears that it was overheating, and so they shut it down to prevent anything bad from happening. The other account said that it actually caught on fire and kind of burned itself up and destroyed itself from the heat from all those cameras. And so I was interested in, in some ways kind of reviving this, this idea of the project of the cineorama. And what I ended up doing with the piece was to bring together two, kind of conflicting source materials. One was the cineorama. The other is this image on the left. It's Samuel Beckett's play Ohio Impromptu, which was one of his later works. And these two texts both kind of center on the idea of home in some ways, but have very different relations to it. The cineorama is kind of a, frivolous kind of escapism. It's an amusement, and again, kind of an empowering experience for the viewer. Samuel Beckett's play is about this narrator that is kind of locked into exile, self-imposed exile, and this becomes a source of really abject sorrow for the narrator because he can't go back home. And it might be helpful if I just describe the Beckett play a little bit. You can see the entire play is very sparse. It's two characters seated at a table. One's the reader. He can only read verbatim from this book that's on the table. The other is the listener, and he can only listen, except by rapping on the table, he can cause the reader to go back and repeat the last line that was said. So this sort of bit of trying to hold on to something or remember something. And the two characters have a lot of mimetic qualities. So they look exactly the same, and you're not quite sure what their relationship is, whether it's the same person, whether it's past and present, whether it's a hallucination, a dream. You're never quite sure what the relation is or sort of space you're looking at. There's a couple still shots from this piece. In some ways, I was tired of working digitally and wanted to do something that used photography in different ways and was maybe a bit more hands-on. Like I said, that Gone to Seed piece, it was a 40-foot long piece that I made on a 15-inch monitor. It took a year to do, and I was just sort of exhausted with it. So this is a little bit different. It's a mix of still photo, live-action video, animation, rephotographing. There's Polaroids that I filmed as well. And I was interested in all of these different photographic mediums, all of these different aesthetics, and maybe having all of those kind of come together to mimic the confusion of the Beckett play, where we're never sure exactly what space we're in. And so this piece kind of navigates between all of these different iterations of the medium. This is just a sort of documentation of the production of it. You can see it's really kind of rudimentary and crude in the way that it's filmed. And these two texts, related to ideas about home, I wanted to, root it in my own home. And so the entire piece was shot on site in a small town in Ohio. I visited the historical archives of the town and used archival imagery and things like that as well. When I first showed it, I went back and showed it in this theater in this small town to kind of return it to that community, which was that first shot that we looked at. This is another kind of production shot of it. This is the prop that I used to film the hot air balloon liftoff. That's part of that work. And again, it has this kind of lo-fi, do-it-yourself, kind of take, very handmade, that I thought, in some ways related to the kind of ethic of the place. It's agrarian, blue-collar community, that I was from. People were very much in touch with their tools and the land. And so, like a final kind of gesture or layer to this is the sound from the piece. I created this kind of re-recording of it. It filtered the sound through a piece of land that was taken off of the site. And then some of the images in the video were re-photographed, filmed on a screen that was kind of influenced very slightly by the wind, moving it, just to kind of reinvent the place in another way, very subtle way. So the short clip from this, so you can kind of see what it ended up being.
Could he not now seen the dear face and heard the unspoken words, "Stay where we were so long alone together. My shade will comfort you." Could he not now turn back, acknowledge his error, and return to where they were once so long alone together? Alone together, so much shared? No. What he had done alone could not be undone. Nothing he had ever done alone could ever be undone by him alone.
At the time, this is a really unique and kind of helpful experience for me. I made this when I was living in Buffalo, and most of the work that I do is pretty solitary. But with this, I got to collaborate with a composer that did an original score for a theater actor who helped me with the narration from the Peck play. So it's a really interesting collaboration with them. This is a project, a series of photographs called "I'm in the Wrong Film," which is kind of a lifted title. "I'm in the Wrong Film" is a German colloquialism. It's used to indicate a disorientation, on the part of the speaker, where their environment, their surroundings, kind of taken on a fictitious sort of surreal quality. So I thought I could use that phrase again to kind of describe, what's going on in the images and this individual dislocation that's being performed by the figure again and again in these different scenes. This idea of dislocation, this is also a project that I began after I left my hometown for the first time, and so I was sort of kind of going through some of these things as well. So it has a sort of personal narrative, but then I thought that idea could also be more broadly applied to describe these sorts of places, the rural and post-industrial landscapes that I was from in Middle America. Places that I think have been used in really interesting ways, politically and aesthetically and socially, and kind of forming a national image and identity of America. Given the election season and all of that, we always sort of see it come around every 4 years and that kind of thing. But on the other hand, there are places that in a lot of ways are no longer able to sustain themselves and become subject to an erasure over the last 50 or 60 years. We've been hollowed out economically, it's population loss, encroachment of the suburbs. And so this project was interested in examining the psychology of the space in between the mythology of those places and the actuality of them. And producing a tension or absurdity and trying to reconcile those nostalgic ideas with the reality of it. These are, for the most part, kind of performative photographs where I'm in the images as the actor. This one, there's a series of kind of empty landscapes in here too to kind of balance it out. But the project really rests on the performances of the character, and it's interested in like how this would take shape, and sort of what kind of figure you would be. One example that kind of stuck with me was the flaneur, which was this person that Walter Benjamin and Baudelaire talked about. Kind of an urban detective, an urban wonder, somebody who was engaged in the social space, primarily through disengaging with it in some ways, just observing. Somebody that, like it says here, is an idler, that wanders through the streets of the city in a kind of detached way, observing modern life, but not fully being a participant in it. And it was very similar to the way that I kind of crafted the character from the work up to that point, but also had this kind of interesting relation to photography too, since the role of the photographer when that emerged kind of stepped right into this idea of the flaneur, the urban detective, the observer who's part of that scene, but also kind of apart from it. And the character also coincided with the advent of the simulated space. This quote from Benjamin talks about how the flaneur couldn't exist without the arcade in Paris, which is this interiorized street. And I was interested in the way that that figure kind of emerged alongside a simulated space, and how the flaneur wanders around in an artificial environment that's been constructed around him for his activity. And I thought about that being kind of similar in some ways to the way that a lot of these kind of small-town, rural, post-industrial communities embrace nostalgic and in a lot of ways false image or sense of themselves, whether it's for economic viability or whatever. They kind of produce a simulation of themselves in that way, and that nostalgia being a way of denying the present and denying what's happening. And so as this project moved along, I was more and more interested in a dialogue between the narrative that's happening in the images and the narrative that's going on in the performances, and finding a narrative in the construction of the work too. So these really end up referencing the mechanics of film, silent film, theater, where they appear cohesive, but they're all digital composites. And it's a performer performing a scene in front of a kind of a false decor. And all these images are really traces of the process in the work. Or if you take a kind of initial look at them, they all seem to make sense and they're cohesive, but the more you investigate them, the more their construction starts to kind of falter and fall apart. Kind of like if you watch bad silent films, right, everything's going along okay for a while, but then the actor will bump into the stage set and it kind of wobbles a little bit, and the illusion falls apart. So I have this one image that it's playing. I'll kind of show this, the way these images are constructed around the character. That might not come across, on the projection, but if you were to look at these things in person and kind of, examine them closely, there are these moments in all of them, where they start to fall apart in some way. Like there's issues of scale where things don't quite match up, or the lighting effects kind of incongruent with one another, and that sort of thing. So this sort of takes the image apart and then reconstructs it. And you can definitely see this sort of separation between what's going on in the performance with the figure and then what's going on in the landscape. These two things are totally separate in the work. And all these performances are sort of, based around kind of impotence or ineffectual quality of the character. And each one uses this stillness of the photograph, to suspend that action, to freeze it, and to leave the gesture of the character incomplete. So whatever he's trying to accomplish, whatever he's trying to do, is never really realized. And there are often, actions too that are predicated on failure. This sort of image of painting and that kind of labor that will all come undone eventually. But like I said, a lot of it is in the construction of the image as well, and in that kind of mimicking, the ineffectual quality of the performances. So if you examine this, you can kind of see all these inconsistencies. Like in this particular image, I don't think this will show up that well, but there's this drip of paint that's completely on a scale to the rest of the work on this side, shot here. And like this facade of the building is a scale model made of popsicle sticks and put together, so it's like about that big. And there's this sort of disconnect between the figure and the places in all of these. And I was interested in the way that there's no kind of authentic or tangible relationship between the person and this. And it's sort of humorous, and I was interested in that really potent mix of humor and failure in it's always a play in the theater of the absurd. I was trying to incorporate it into every aspect of the work. Sort of tragically futile performances, but also again in the mechanics of the theater and the physical and the psychological separation of the actor and the decor. So again, like somebody or something that I was looking at or into at the time. This is the Rail Rotter, one of Buster Keaton's, it's actually his final silent film. I was influenced by, like several silent films, archetypal everyman that Keaton and Charlie Chaplin was always portraying. This particular film was kind of interesting for me. It's a cross-country travelogue, across Canada, and the entire film has the character moving across the landscape in his own kind of enclosed space, and it has that sort of sense of wandering. Like the flaneur from place to place, like my character between frame to frame, photograph to photograph, and not fully existing within the landscape, but occasionally kind of having a dialogue with it. So like, this work, and came back again and got to see it. I was really interested in embracing that idea of failure. And maybe offering a critique by way of failure, where each element in the scenario over time reveals itself to be ineffectual. The social narrative of the small town and those places, the performance of the character, and the faltering construction of the image itself, they're all kind of coming together to describe a desire, but also a real absurdity in trying to maintain a sense of place and identity, trying to locate oneself within these landscapes, in these kind of rural post-industrial communities that are living in a state of flux. Let's see. Maybe one more thing. This is a very different one, and a project that I'm not very far along with, but I think I'll show some anyway. This is a project that I started working on over the last summer. Traveled to Korea and stayed there for about 6 weeks last summer. My wife is Korean, so we went there with the family and visited her family there. First thing I realized when we got there was that our vacation overlapped exactly with the monsoon season. We were there for the whole thing. And so I ended up making this project that kind of took up that interval of time as a theme, as a starting place for an idea. And so there's two components to this work. This is the first, a series of portraits of people that I would see in the streets during the rains, or sort of in these environments. I used a historical process that you could, the photograph is developed in water. And so what I would do to make these would be, I would print them, expose them to light, and then when the monsoon rain would come, I would run out and throw the photographs into the rainwater, and the monsoon itself would kind of develop these images in sort of irregular ways. And these are printed on traditional Korean paper too, which kind of accounts for some of the anomalies in the images and the atmosphere in the photographs. So then these are interspersed with just kind of straight documentary images, sort of a personal travelogue, of that time and of that place. And I guess the thing that I take from it is there's a real intensity to living there. It's sort of unlike any other place that I've ever been. And so it's almost overwhelming in some ways to visit and to spend time there and to observe the people just going about day-to-day sorts of things. But on the other hand, in some ways it's really effortless for me because I don't speak the language and not too many people there speak English to me. And so I sort of like float through, there's no pressure and it's sort of easy and nice and there's no obligations or anything. And so like there's a sort of real duality to that. And I guess the project is sort of taking form around linking that sentiment to the phenomenon of the monsoon itself and this kind of personal travelogue. So I'm just going to cycle through the rest of these images. Like I said, I've only been working on this one for a couple of weeks after shooting it, so it's not all the way there. Yeah, it's kind of funny. My family came to America many generations ago. So although like I'm saddled with this really German name, growing up I had kind of no real connection or sense of belonging, to the country at all. And neither did he. It was like my great, maybe even further back. So he's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why, when you put your character into the the movie scenes, why he's always in a white T-shirt and like black pants?
It became this kind of uniform, right? And that character of the everyman, sort of anonymous, right? That would maybe sort of call for easier identification between the viewer, and the figure. There's also something where there's elements of maybe autobiography in that project, but I didn't want it to become overly autobiographical. And I feel like in that work, it's not me as a character, as a person, but it's more sort of stock, character. It's sort of wide open for everybody to come to the work and use or project into.
I don't have one, and I'm not trying to make an advertisement for it, but I know Apple now has the panoramic view option. How do you have any response to that in like your I don't know, your passion for panoramic stuff? Do you see opportunity for that, or is it just an iPhone feature?
You mean, yeah, the sort of stitching
Yeah, you
together?
can take, I mean,
on the
it's,
phone?
I guess it's just taking a bigger picture, but, you know, listening to you talk about panorama, you made it sound like it's almost, it's a finite thing, like it's not happening anymore. Do you, I don't know, does that have any relation to, or do you have anything to say about that, I guess?
Yeah, you know, I guess I haven't spent much time with it,
I haven't.
you know, on my own. I'd say, you know, my interest in the panorama is much more in like the physical space and the way that, you know, produced a kind of experience for the viewer that really was related to these kind of social concerns at the time. And like the panoramic image itself, just a sort of elongated, you know, wide angle photograph, you know, seems to be more kind of just concerned with the romantic view of the landscape. And so I'm less interested in that. It seems less dynamic than the actual physical spaces. Yeah.
So I remember the question that I was going to ask as a follow-up question to your grandfather who's of German descent. So is there anything about so he was in the was an American serviceman who was stationed in Germany, right? So he was an occupying force.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything about the optic he was using that you think that dynamic of power of someone external to the country occupying it and taking pictures of the devastation? Was there anything there about the national identity and power in relation to the images?
I don't quite know how to, you know, respond to that. I think, you know, that's a really complex question, and for me, there's so much of that is sort of inaccessible in a way, because I don't know what those images were. Like a lot of people, you know, never really spoke about that experience at all, and in some ways, like I said, for me, it felt like a very strained, you know, thing to embark on, to try to understand, to ascertain, you know, what his experience was like, and to try to re-perform it. Like, I kind of feel like, again, failed in a lot of ways. And he was somebody that never, you know, sort of spoke about that. And I think that, for me, on a personal level, is like one of the interesting things about the work.
Was in South Korea too.
Yeah.
And I went to this
You had
exhibition.
coffee there.
I'm surprised I didn't see the bowl with the. Anyway, so I went to this exhibition and I saw that everyone was seeing and viewing the exhibition through their mobile device, and no one was looking at the actual art. And I stood there for about, you know, an hour just watching everyone view the entire museum like this, and thinking about the augmented reality and the potential there for it as a device, a time-based media device to tell a story. I'm wondering, because I'm interested in it with my own work with the augmented reality, but I'm really struggling. I find it interesting and challenging, the ideas behind it, but I'm really struggling to kind of fit my work within that as you know. So I'm wondering, is there a time that you're exploring these different medias that, you know, you're interested in the research and the potential there, but is there ever a time that you're like, yeah, this isn't going to work for what I want to do?
Yeah, well, I've never done augmented reality in particular before, and I've talked with some people, you know, that work with it, and it seems to be, on a technical level, just a huge challenge to try to put, you know, those monumental buildings into actual spaces, because you have to sort of account for all of the stuff that's around it. So there's a lot of variables in that. But in terms of like the technology and the potential of it, you know, not working out. Like, I guess maybe the one that I showed that I'm not so sure about is the rephotographing in Street View, because I like the idea, but I don't know if I like the product. you know, because the photographs themselves seem kind of slight, you know, and just, you know, I don't know if there's any, it's an empty image, which I think for the video kind of works quite well because you get to experience the emptiness, but it's still photographs. I'm not sure if it works in the same way. So that one sort of I've been holding on to for a long time, but I'm willing to commit to it.
Was the school of film that you got from your grandfather sort of like a narrative introduction to the rest of the line drawings and the architectural landscapes? Did you use it as an image in to show with the rest of them?
The roll of film that was black, no, but there were other photographs that he'd taken that he did, you know, process and develop, and I had those, and those were the things that the drawings kind of came out of. I don't know if I can go back, and I think even the one image of the archival photograph that I have is kind of, you know, it's cropped in. But what I ended up doing and how I generated the line drawings, where I'd take these kind of photographs of the bombed-out buildings and try to speculate or imagine, you know, those portions that are no longer there, and make drawings that conform to, you know, those spaces and those shapes. And then, you know, it was a process of putting that back in, you know, trying to sort of, I don't know, like I said, you know, conjure up the memory and the image and the information on that blank old film. Thanks, everybody.